Grant placed both hands flat on the table. His voice had a slight tremor. Nora, this house, these assets, you cannot take all of it. Nora did not look up. She set her pen down on the contract. Slowly, deliberately. I beg your pardon? You know exactly what I mean. Grant's jaw tightened. This is revenge. Revenge? Nora looked up. Her eyes were cold as stone. You slept with my best friend for 6 months. While I was carrying your child. She pushed the document across the table toward him. The infidelity clause in our prenuptial agreement, do you remember it? I am the one who wrote it. Color drained from Grant's face. Nora, please. Don't. Her voice did not waver, not even slightly. You have Sloan to beg. Me? She stood up, one hand resting on her belly. I have a lawyer. She was betrayed by the two people she trusted most, and instead of falling apart, she quietly activated a clause she had written herself 4 years earlier. If you want to know how a woman 8 months pregnant took back everything on her own, keep watching. The story begins with a single buzz on a phone left face down on a kitchen counter. The sound that started everything was nothing dramatic. It was just a buzz. A single buzz on the marble kitchen counter, 7:32 in the morning. Nora Calloway stood at the stove in her husband's oversized Stanford sweatshirt, one hand pressed to the small of her back, the other stirring oatmeal she didn't particularly want. She was 8 months pregnant. Her feet hurt. Her back hurt. Everything hurt in that low, constant, impossible-to-explain way that only women who have carried another human being inside their bodies will ever understand. Grant's phone buzzed. She didn't even look at it at first. She wasn't that kind of wife. She had never been that kind of wife. She believed in privacy, in trust, in the basic decency of not reading someone else's messages. She had said that to Dot once, and her mother had raised an eyebrow and said, Nora, baby, trust is earned every single day. And Nora had smiled and said, Mom, you're so suspicious. She turned off the burner. She turned around to set the oatmeal on the counter, and she saw the screen. It was just a preview, the way iPhones show the first line of a message before you unlock them. Just a name and the first few words. The name was Sloan. The first words were, last night was worth every. The screen went dark. Nora stood very still. Her hand was resting on the counter. The oatmeal was cooling in the bowl beside her. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the San Francisco skyline was doing its ordinary, beautiful morning thing. Fog burning off the bay, light going gold. She picked up the phone. His passcode was their anniversary. He had never changed it. She knew that was sentimental. She had always thought it was sweet. She unlocked the phone. She read the message. Then she read the one before it. Then she read the thread from the beginning. She sat down on the kitchen floor. Right there on the cold marble, she didn't plan to. Her legs just stopped working. She sat cross-legged in his Stanford sweatshirt with her enormous belly resting between her knees, and she read every single message between her husband and her best friend going back 6 months. 6 months. She had been pregnant for 8 months. He had been sleeping with Sloan since she was 2 months along. She pressed the phone to her chest. God, she thought. I was so stupid. The signs were all there. She thought about every time Sloan had been at the house this year. Every dinner. Every Sunday brunch. Every time Sloan had hugged Grant hello a half second longer than necessary. Nora had thought, she's just affectionate. That's how Sloan is. She had laughed it off. She had been busy being pregnant. Busy growing a person. She thought about 2 months ago when she had called Sloan crying because Grant was working late again. Sloan had said, he loves you, Nora. I promise. He absolutely loves you. She pressed the phone harder against her chest. She counted to 10. She did not throw up. She wanted to. She did not. She put the phone exactly where she had found it. Exactly the same angle. Screen down. She stood up. It took longer than it should have. The baby kicked. Hard, like she knew something was wrong. Nora put her hand on her belly. It's okay, she whispered. We're okay. She was already lying. She sat down at the kitchen table and she waited for her husband to come downstairs. Grant came down at 8:15, freshly showered. Tie already knotted. Moving through the kitchen with the casual authority of a man who owned everything he could see. He kissed the top of her head. He saw the oatmeal. He said, Did you make enough for me? She looked at him. She said no. He laughed. He thought she was joking. He poured himself coffee. He checked his phone. She watched his jaw tighten just barely, just for a half second, and then relax as he put the phone in his pocket without answering. I have the Hartley meeting this morning, he said. Probably won't be home for dinner. Okay, she said. He kissed her on the cheek. He left. She listened to the front door close. She listened to his car back out of the garage. She sat in the silence of the most beautiful kitchen she had ever lived in the most beautiful house in Pacific Heights, in the most beautiful marriage she had ever believed in. And she thought, I am not going to cry. Not yet. First, I am going to understand exactly what I am dealing with. She picked up her own phone. She called Patricia Holt. Patricia had been Nora's supervising attorney at Brennan and Cole before Nora left to support Grant's vision. Patricia picked up on the second ring. Nora, Patricia said, it's early. I know, Nora said. Patricia, I need to know something. In the state of California, what are a pregnant wife's rights if her husband is having an affair? A pause. Are you asking hypothetically? Patricia said. No, Nora said, I am not. Another pause. Longer, Nora. Patricia's voice changed. It became the voice she used in depositions. Clear, precise. Zero room for confusion. Go somewhere private. Get a notebook. Tell me everything. She took the notebook from the drawer beside the refrigerator, the one she used for grocery lists. She turned to a clean page. She sat down on the kitchen floor again, back against the cabinet, belly resting between her knees. She told Patricia everything. She did not cry while she was talking. She cried for exactly 4 minutes afterward, sitting on that cold marble floor while Patricia waited quietly on the other end of the line. Then Patricia said, "Are you done?" Nora took a breath. "Yes," she said. "Good," Patricia said. "Here is what you are going to do. This is the thing about being in shock. The body keeps going. The coffee gets made. The hair gets brushed. The grocery list gets written. The body is smarter than the mind in some ways. It knows that survival is not a feeling. It is a series of small actions, one after another, while the mind is somewhere else entirely." Nora made coffee. She brushed her hair. She did not add anything to the grocery list. She sat at the kitchen table with her notebook, and she wrote down everything Patricia had told her. The screenshot instructions. The document list. The phrase, "Do not move anything from the joint accounts." Do not change any passwords. Do not signal that you know. Then she picked up Grant's phone from the counter. She took screenshots of every message, every single one. She emailed them to herself. Then she deleted the email from Grant's sent folder so he wouldn't see it. She put the phone back, same angle, screen down. She looked at her hands for a moment. They were steady. She found that interesting. She had expected them to shake. She thought, I used to be a litigator. I know how to build a case. I know how to gather evidence before the other side knows you have it. I know how to be calm when everything is on fire. She had learned that skill in a courtroom. She had never imagined she would need it in her own kitchen. Outside, the fog had fully burned away. The bay was blue and clear and impossibly beautiful. She pressed her hand flat against her belly. The baby was still, resting now, gathering herself maybe. It's okay, Nora said again. This time she almost believed it. She didn't tell Patricia everything that morning. She told her enough. Enough for Patricia to say, do not move anything from the house. Do not close any joint accounts. Do not say anything to Grant that signals you know. Not yet. Patricia paused. And Nora, get screenshots of those messages. Every one of them. I already did, Nora said. A beat. Good girl, Patricia said. You still think like a lawyer. Nora laughed. It came out strange, too hollow. She pressed her fingers to her eyes. She spent the morning doing what any reasonable woman in crisis does. She cleaned. She reorganized the linen closet. She refolded every towel. She put them back in color order, white, ivory, cream, plush, and then she stood in the middle of the bathroom and looked at the perfect stack of towels and thought, Sloan helped me pick these out. Sloan had helped her choose these towels at the home store on Fillmore Street. Sloan had held up the blush ones and said, these are romantic, Nora. Get the blush ones. She sat down on the edge of the tub. She didn't move for a long time. She was not crying. She was just sitting, being very still, the way animals go still before something happens. Her phone rang at noon. Sloan. Of course it was Sloan. The text read, hey, lunch today? I found that new ramen place on Valencia you wanted to try. Nora looked at the message for a long time. She typed back, can't today. Tired. Rain check? Sloan sent back a heart emoji. Nora put the phone face down on the counter. She drove herself to her OB appointment at 2 o'clock. Dr. Bennett measured the baby, checked her blood pressure, told her everything looked perfect. Nora lay on the exam table with the cold gel on her belly and watched her daughter on the ultrasound screen, that flickering, grainy, miraculous image, and she made a promise to her right then and there. You will not inherit my mistakes. You will not learn that love means shrinking yourself. You will know what it looks like when someone actually deserves you. She cried on the drive home. Just those 15 minutes. She gave herself exactly that. Then she parked in the garage, sat in the car for 4 more minutes because she wasn't quite ready to go in, wiped her face with the back of her hand, and went inside. She texted Grant, home for dinner tonight. I made your mom's chicken piccata. He came home at 6:45. He was in a good mood. That somehow made it worse. She had made the dinner. She had set the table. She had put on a dress instead of leggings because she knew she was going to have this conversation, and she needed the small armor of feeling like herself, not like a person who had been falling apart all day. She waited until he had sat down, until he had eaten half his dinner, until his guard was down. Then she set her fork down. She said, Grant, I read your messages with Sloan. He looked up. She watched his face. She had been a litigator. She knew how to watch faces. She saw at the flash, panic, calculation, and then the smooth wall going up. What are you talking about? He said. Your phone was on the counter this morning, she said. A message came through. I read the thread, all of it. 6 months, Grant. Silence. She watched him decide which way to play it. She could almost see it happening. The deflection options cycling through his mind. You're imagining it. That's not what it looks like. You're being paranoid. You've been hormonal. He chose, Nora. It's complicated. She looked at him. You're 8 months pregnant, he said. I didn't want to do this now. I was going to wait for what exactly, she said. He set his fork down too. He had the decency to look somewhere other than her face. He looked at the table. She makes me feel. He stopped. If you say alive, Nora said quietly, I will not be responsible for what happens next. He said nothing. How long have you been in love with her? Nora said. His silence was its own answer. Oh. She felt it move through her like cold water. This is not just an affair. He is in love with her. She thought about Sloane. Sloane, who had been her best friend since freshman orientation. Sloane, who had been the maid of honor at their wedding. Sloane, who had thrown her baby shower 4 weeks ago and cried happy tears during the toast and said, You two deserve everything. I am not crazy. I know what I saw. I know exactly what this is. She stood up from the table. Nora, he said. I am going to need you to sleep in the guest room, she said, starting tonight. Nora, we need to talk about this. We are talking about it. She picked up her water glass. She was very calm. She didn't know where the calm was coming from, but she held onto it with both hands. We are going to handle this like adults, but you do not get to sleep in our bed anymore, and you do not get to call her from this house anymore. He stood up too. He was a tall man. He used that height sometimes the way powerful men do. He did not do it now. Maybe he could read something in her face. Are you going to be okay? He said. And the terrible thing was that he meant it. He actually meant it. That is no longer your concern, she said. Good night, Grant. She walked upstairs. She heard him standing in the kitchen below her, not moving for a long time. She got into bed. She lay in the dark. She pressed her hand to the side of her belly, where the baby was pushing her foot out, pressing against Nora's ribs like she was testing the walls of the world. Good, Nora whispered to her in the dark. Push, she called Dot at 10 o'clock. Her mother answered on the first ring. Dot always answered on the first ring. Mom, Nora said. One word, just that. Dot said, I am getting in the car. Mom, it is a 4-hour drive, Nora said. So I'll be there by 2 in the morning, Dot said. Put coffee on. The major turning point came the next morning. Nora had fallen asleep with Dot sitting in the armchair beside the bed, Dot's hand resting on hers, the way she used to sit when Nora was sick as a child. She woke up at 6 with the particular alertness of pregnancy, and she lay still for a moment listening to Dot's quiet breathing. Then she picked up her laptop. She had been Grant's wife for 4 years. Before that, she had been his attorney on 2 acquisitions. She understood his business better than almost anyone outside the company's inner circle. She started going through their joint finances. What she found stopped her cold. The Pacific Heights house, they owned it jointly. She was on the deed. She had insisted on that when they married. Old habit from her attorney days. Grant had laughed and said, Whatever makes you comfortable, counselor. The art collection. She had negotiated the purchases. Her name was on 2 of the major pieces. And then the thing she had almost forgotten about, the clause in their prenuptial agreement. She had reviewed that prenup herself. Grant's first attorney had drafted it. She had redlined it before they signed. And there, in Section 14, was the infidelity clause she had insisted on almost as a joke, almost as a formality, because she had trusted him completely and thought it would never matter. In the event of documented infidelity, the non-offending spouse would receive the primary residence, 40% of marital assets accumulated during the marriage, and full legal and physical custody of any children with generous support. She had written that clause herself. She pressed her hand over her mouth. Then she started to laugh. She laughed until she was crying, and she couldn't tell where one stopped and the other started. She had protected herself 4 years ago, before she even knew she needed to. She picked up her phone. She called Patricia. Patricia, she said, I need to tell you something about our prenuptial agreement. A pause. I am listening, Patricia said. I think I built a trapdoor into it, Nora said. An even longer pause. Then Patricia said, very quietly, Nora Calloway, I always said you were the best associate I ever trained. Memory is cruel. That is the thing no one tells you. When someone betrays you, the betrayal does not just live in the present. It goes back. It rewrites everything. Dot stayed the whole week. She slept in the guest room. Grant had moved to a hotel 2 days after the confrontation, quietly, with 2 suitcases, the way people leave when they know they are in the wrong. He left his gym bag in the hall closet. He left his reading glasses on the nightstand. He left all the small evidence of himself scattered through the house, like a person who is not sure they are actually gone. Nora and Dot ate breakfast together every morning. They watched old movies at night. They did not talk about Grant constantly. They talked about other things, the way women who love each other do about Dot's garden, about whether the baby would have Grant's dark eyes or Nora's green ones, about what to name her. They had settled on Hazel. They had settled on Hazel before all of this. But in between, in the quiet, the memories came, their first date. Grant had taken her to a tiny pasta place in the Shishin, nothing fancy, and she had worn a yellow dress, and he had looked at her like she was the most interesting thing he had ever seen. She had thought, this is it. This is the real thing. Their wedding, the lighthouse ceremony on the Marin Headlands, the September fog rolling in just as the officiant got to the vows, everything silver and cinematic. Sloane standing beside her in a dusty rose dress, crying before Nora was. Sloane crying. How many times had Nora thought about that moment and thought, that is what real friendship looks like? She reorganized the baby's nursery at 2 in the morning on a Tuesday. She could not sleep and there was nothing else to do. She took every item off the shelves, dusted each surface, put everything back. The little stuffed elephant, the white noise machine, the small framed print that said "You are loved" in pale green letters. Sloane had given her that print. It was a shower gift. Sloane had stood in this room and handed it to her and smiled. She took it off the wall. She held it for a long time. She did not throw it. She was not going to be someone who threw things. She put it in a bag for donation. She sat on the floor of the nursery with her back against the crib and her hands on her belly, and she let herself go through it all. Every memory, every contaminated beautiful thing. The trip to Positano for their 3rd anniversary, where Grant had surprised her with a boat for the day, and she had been sunburned and laughing and completely happy. The Sunday mornings with the newspaper and the bad coffee, and the way he would reach for her hand without looking. The fight they had at Christmas 2 years ago that had seemed so important and now seemed so small it was almost funny. All of it. She looked at all of it. He never loved me the way I thought he did. He loved the idea of me. She knew that was what had happened. She was not angry enough yet to be perfectly clear-eyed about it, but she was starting to see it. Grant needed someone who made him look right. Someone accomplished, intelligent, from a good family, devoted. She had been all of those things. She had checked every box. But Sloane was newer. Sloane was exciting. Sloane did not know about his bad habits, his complicated relationship with his father, the debt-shame spiral from the early company days. Sloane saw the finished product. He traded depth for novelty. And I was so busy being the perfect wife that I stopped asking whether he was being a good husband. That thought came slowly. It hurt in a different way from the others. Not the hot hurt of betrayal, but the cooler, sadder hurt of self-recognition. She had made herself smaller, not because he asked her to. He never asked her directly. But she had felt that subtle pressure, the way his eyes moved when she talked about a case she missed working on, the way he changed the subject when she mentioned Patricia or Brennan and Cole. She had felt it, and she had adjusted. She had accommodated. She had turned down the volume on herself so gradually that she had not noticed until the volume was almost all the way down. Somewhere along the way, I became invisible. She stayed on the nursery floor until 4 in the morning. Then she got up, washed her face, and went back to bed. She slept better than she had in a week. Dot made blueberry pancakes in the morning. Nora sat at the kitchen island and told her everything. Not about the legal strategy, but about the memories, about Positano, about the way she had turned down the volume on herself. Dot listened without interrupting. Dot was very good at that. When Nora finished, Dot poured more coffee. She said, "You know what I noticed about Grant?" Nora looked at her. "He was always most in love with you," Dot said, "when you needed something from him. When you stopped needing things, he got restless." She set down the coffee pot. "That is not on you, Nora. That is a particular kind of man. They love a project, not a partner." Nora was quiet. "Sloane was a new project," Dot said. "That is all. It should have been a smaller comfort than it was. It was not small at all." She called Claudette that afternoon. Claudette was her therapist, 42, warm-voiced, with an office on Sacramento Street that always smelled like cedar. "Tell me where you are emotionally," Claudette said. "Grief," Nora said. "But underneath the grief there is something else. Something harder." "What does it feel like?" Claudette said. Nora thought about it. "Clarity," she said. "Like when a storm clears. You can see everything you could not see before." Claudette was quiet for a moment. "That is not a bad place to be," she said. "What do you want to do with that clarity?" Nora looked out the window of her beautiful kitchen in her beautiful house. "I want to use it," she said. "You know this feeling. The one where your brain will not stop replaying the moments you missed. The signs that were right in front of you. The thing you told yourself meant nothing. Betrayal does not just live in the discovery. It lives in every memory you have to go back and look at again with different eyes. It is exhausting. And it is not your fault that you trusted someone who did not deserve it. Patricia Holt's office was on the 32nd floor of a building in the financial district. She had good art and bad coffee and the kind of presence that made opposing counsel nervous from hello. Nora sat across from her and Patricia laid out the full picture. She had been reviewing everything since Nora's first call. She had a yellow legal pad. She had made notes in her precise diagonal handwriting. She tapped the pad with her pen. "The prenup is solid," she said. "You drafted it well." "I know," Nora said. "The infidelity clause is documented. The text messages are dated and explicit. We have 6 months of evidence. A family law in this county will have no ambiguity about interpretation. Patricia looked up. Grant is going to realize very quickly that he is on the wrong side of a document his wife wrote. Nora's mouth curved. He thought I was being paranoid when I asked for that clause. Most people think a prenup is a formality, Patricia said. The good ones know it is a plan. She set down her pen now. The house. You are on the deed jointly. Under the prenup, you are entitled to the primary residence. That is a $9.2 million asset, Nora. Nora had known the number. Hearing it said out loud in a conference room was different. And the art? She said. Your name is on the certificates of authenticity for the 3 major pieces you acquired during the marriage. His attorneys will argue the business context. Ours will argue the marital contribution. I think we win that one. Nora nodded. I also want to talk to you about Callaway Holdings, Patricia said. She paused. I know you are not on the board, but walk me through what you know about the company's structure. Nora leaned forward. She talked for 45 minutes about the capital structure, about the debt Grant had restructured in year 2, about the investors she had helped court, about the acquisition due diligence she had reviewed informally from the kitchen table, because Grant trusted her eye. Patricia was writing steadily. When Nora finished, Patricia looked up. You understand what you contributed to that company, she said. I was not on the payroll, Nora said. No, Patricia agreed. But in California, a spouse's contribution to a business during a marriage, including indirect support, professional expertise, and opportunity cost is compensable. She leaned back. Grant built a lot of that company on a foundation that included your labor, unpaid labor. Nora felt something shift in her chest. She had known this abstractly. She had read it in textbooks. She had never applied it to herself. I deserve better than this. I have always deserved better than this. What is the timeline? Nora said. Patricia looked at her steadily. How far along are you? 8 weeks to my due date, Nora said. We can file now. It will be uncomfortable. He will know immediately that you are serious, that you have counsel, that you have been prepared for longer than he realizes. She paused. Or we can wait until after the baby is born. Either has strategic arguments. Nora thought about it. She thought about Grant in his hotel room. She thought about Sloan. She thought about those 6 months of messages. She thought about the nursery and the little stuffed elephant and the print that said you are loved that was now in a donation bag. File now, she said. Patricia nodded once. She picked up the phone on her desk. I will call Eli Marchetti, she said. He is the best forensic financial analyst I work with. We will need him to go through Callaway Holdings for the full asset picture. She dialed. Eli is good, Nora. You will like him. She met Eli the following Thursday. He was not what she expected. She had expected someone aggressive, someone who wore numbers like armor. He was quiet. 34, dark-haired, with reading glasses, he kept pushing up his nose. He shook her hand and said, I have read everything Patricia sent me. I have some questions. They sat in the conference room for 3 hours. He asked smart questions, clear ones. He did not condescend, and he did not rush. When she explained something he did not know, he wrote it down exactly as she said it without paraphrasing, which she found quietly respectful. At the end, he took off his glasses. Okay, he said. Here's what I can see from the public filings, and here's what I think is probably invisible in the private structure. He slid a page across the table. These numbers represent the conservative estimate of Grant Callaway's net worth as of 6 months ago. She looked at the number. She had known broadly what Grant was worth. Living with someone tells you things. The houses, the cars, the ease. Seeing it as a single figure on a page was different. She kept her face neutral. She was a lawyer. She could keep her face neutral. And this, Eli said, sliding another page, is a rough conservative estimate of your claim under the prenup in California community property law. She looked at the second number. She set the page down. Eli, she said, are you telling me that my husband is about to realize he accidentally made me a very wealthy woman? Eli's mouth did something that was almost a smile. That is one way to put it, he said. Another way to put it is, you negotiated a fair prenup and you are entitled to what you are entitled to. She nodded slowly. He will not take this quietly, she said. No, Eli agreed. He will not, he did not. The divorce papers were served on a Monday morning. Grant called her at 11 o'clock. She let it go to voicemail. He called again. She let it go to voicemail. He texted Nora, call me, right now. We need to talk about this. Then, this is insane. You know this is insane. Then, 1 minute later, I am coming over. She texted Patricia, he is coming to the house. Patricia texted back, do not open the door without your phone recording. Say nothing you would not want a judge to read. Grant arrived 20 minutes later. He had a key still. He let himself in. She was sitting at the kitchen table with a glass of water and her phone face up beside her. He looked terrible, unshaven, eyes too bright. What are you doing? He said. I am getting a glass of water, she said. Nora. He sat down across from her. He put both hands flat on the table. This prenup clause, I did not know you were going to use it like this. Like what? She said. Like a weapon, he said. She looked at him steadily. Grant, I am using it the way any clause in a legal document is intended to be used, as a binding agreement that both parties sign. You could have talked to me. I did talk to you, she said, in this kitchen, 8 days ago. You said, and I am quoting directly, it is complicated. He put his face in his hands. She watched him. She felt something she had not expected, not satisfaction, not pity exactly. More like a very tired kind of clarity. This is who he is. This has always been who he is. I just did not know it yet. Is she worth it? Nora said, looked up. Sloan, she said. Is she worth everything you are about to go through? The house, the assets, the custody schedule, the legal phase, she paused. The reputation? He opened his mouth. He closed it. Because here is the thing about you, Grant, she said quietly. You do things impulsively, and then you want everyone else to clean up the mess. I cleaned it up for 4 years. I am done cleaning. She stood up. You should go, she said. Have your attorney call Patricia? He sat there for another minute, like he could not quite believe the room he was in, like he had expected something different from this. Tears maybe, begging, the version of Nora who was easier to manage. Then he got up. He walked to the door. He paused with his hand on the handle. Nora, he said. Goodbye, Grant, she said. He left. She sat back down at the table. She put both hands on her belly. The baby moved, slow and rolling like a tide. I know, Nora said softly. I know. 2 in the morning. The house was quiet in the way only large, empty houses are quiet. The kind of quiet that has weight and texture. Nora had been awake for an hour and a half. She had tried the pillow arrangement 4 pillows now because her body at 38 weeks required architectural support, and she had tried the breathing exercises from the prenatal app, and she had tried thinking about nothing, which had never worked for anyone in the history of human beings, but she kept attempting it anyway. She gave up and went to the nursery. She turned on the small lamp on the dresser. The room went soft and amber. She sat in the glider, the one she and Dot had spent 2 weeks deciding on, the one that rocked at exactly the right speed, and she put her feet up on the matching ottoman, and she let herself feel everything. She felt afraid. That was the honest word. She had been using other words. Angry, determined, focused, strategic. Those were all true. But underneath all of those was afraid. What if I cannot do this alone? What if Hazel needs a father who is present and Grant is somewhere else, being someone else's story? What if the legal process goes wrong? What if I spend the next 2 years in court and miss her first steps and first words and first everything, because I am managing a war with her father? What if I get everything I am entitled to and I am still lonely? She sat with that for a while. She did not push it away. Claudette had told her not to push things away. Feelings insist, Claudette said. The ones you do not let in find windows. Starting over feels impossible, but staying feels worse. She knew that was true. She had known it since the morning on the kitchen floor with Grant's phone in her hands. She had known she was not going to be someone who looked the other way. It was not in her. She did not have the temperament for it, and more than that, she did not have the desire. She did not want to be with a man who had chosen Sloan. She did not want to be with a man who had said it is complicated and meant I picked someone else. She wanted to want to save the marriage. It seemed like the right feeling to have. She had tried to locate it in herself for the past 3 weeks. It was not there. Maybe that is the most honest thing I have ever admitted. She reached over to the small shelf beside the glider. There was a stack of children's books there. She and Dot had read through them together, laughing at the particularly earnest ones, loving the others. There was a copy of Goodnight Moon that had been Nora's own, her childhood copy, with the cover soft from years of handling and Dot's handwriting on the first page for Nora. The world is big and you are brave. Love, Mom? She opened it. She read it to her daughter, quietly in the amber light. The whole thing, start to finish. Then she read it again. By the 3rd time, she was crying. Not the heavy, heaving kind, the slow, silent kind, the kind that comes when you have held something too long and your arms finally give. She let it happen. She sat in the glider and cried in the dark nursery and let herself be exactly as broken as she was. She did not rush it. She did not apologize for it, even to herself. She just sat with it. Outside, the city was going on. Fog horns in the bay, a car somewhere on the street below, the small, constant proof that the world continued. She is coming, Nora thought. Hazel is coming no matter what. She is coming into whatever world I build her, so I better build a good one. She wiped her face with the sleeve of her robe. She sat there until the crying stopped. Then she got up, went to the kitchen, made chamomile tea, and sat at the table with her laptop. She started making a list, not a legal list, not a financial strategy, a life list. Things she wanted, things she had stopped wanting, because wanting things for herself had started to feel selfish. A consulting practice, she had the credentials and the contacts. Eli had said 3 separate times that she clearly understood Callaway Holdings better than its own board. There was a market for what she knew. Her own place eventually, smaller than this house, somewhere with a garden for Dot to visit and a room Hazel could grow into. Her own name on her own work, her own byline. Her own decisions, made in rooms where she was not adjusting herself to fit someone else's comfort. She wrote it all down. She underlined the last item. Never be invisible again. She went to bed at 4:15. She slept until 8. She woke up feeling, for the first time in weeks, ready. Everyone has had a 2 in the morning moment. The kind where the quiet gets too loud and the fear you have been outrunning finally catches up. The thing about those moments is not that they break you. It is what you decide to do when the crying stops. That is when you find out who you actually are. 2 days later, Nora got a call from a number she did not recognize. She almost did not answer. She answered. "Nora," said the voice on the other end. Familiar. Low, precise, with the particular cadence of someone who has spent decades controlling rooms. "This is Vera Calloway." Nora was very still. Grant's mother. Vera Calloway, who had been cool to Nora from the beginning, not unkind, but assessing, the way old money women assess people who did not grow up in their world. Vera, who had never fully warmed. Vera, who Nora had spent 4 years trying to win over. "Vera," she said carefully. "This is a surprise." "I imagine so," Vera said. A pause. "I have heard what Grant has done. I am not calling to defend him. I want you to know that." Another pause. "I am calling because I would like to have lunch, if you are willing." Nora thought about Patricia, about saying nothing that might complicate the case. She thought about Vera's voice, something in it she had not heard before. "Where?" Nora said. "The club," Vera said. "Thursday noon." Nora wrote it down. "Vera," she said. "Why?" A long silence. "Because my son is behaving like a fool," Vera said. "And because you are about to have my grandchild." And because a pause. The measured pause of someone choosing words with care. "Because I know Sloane Whitfield, and I know exactly what she is." The club was old San Francisco in the way only a few places still were. Dark wood and oil portraits and the smell of good leather and money that was old enough not to need to announce itself. Vera Calloway was already seated when Nora arrived. She stood when Nora came to the table, which Nora had not expected. She kissed her on both cheeks, which Nora also had not expected. They sat, they ordered. For the first 3 minutes they talked about nothing, the way well-bred women do when they are circling something important. Then Vera set down her water glass and looked at Nora directly. "I want to tell you something," she said, "and I want you to listen without deciding how to feel about it until I finish." Nora nodded. "I have known about Sloane and Grant," Vera said, "for 4 months. The air in the room shifted. Nora said, "Let me finish." Her voice was level. "I found out through the Foundation's social events. Sloane had been attending things as his guest that she had no business attending as a friend. I confronted my son. He told me it was nothing. I did not believe him. I chose not to push because I did not think it was my place to interfere in a marriage." She paused. "I was wrong about that. I have had 4 months to think about it, and I was wrong." Nora pressed her lips together. "That does not mean I am an enemy, Nora," Vera said quietly. "It means I made a mistake out of a misguided sense of propriety. I should have called you. I should have told you." "You should have," Nora agreed. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. "Yes," Vera said. She held Nora's gaze. "And I am sorry, in the specific way that I mean it. Not in the vague social way. I am genuinely sorry." Nora sat with that. She had not expected an apology from Vera Calloway. She had not planned for it. She did not know what to do with it. She decided to accept it. "What do you want, Vera?" she said, not unkindly, just directly. Vera's chin lifted slightly. "I want my grandchild to have a relationship with the Calloway family, on terms that are fair to you, not terms my son dictates." She set down her fork. "And I want you to know that I've retained my own counsel, because Grant's management of certain family foundation assets during this period may be relevant to your proceedings. My counsel believes certain documents might be of interest to Patricia Holt." Nora looked at her. Vera met her eyes. "Are you telling me," Nora said slowly, "that you have financial documentation that supports my case?" "I am telling you," Vera said, "that my attorney will be in touch with yours." Nora sat back. The most unexpected person had become her ally. She thought about Grant. She thought about how he had never fully understood his mother, written her off as old-fashioned, assumed she deferred to him the way she had deferred to his father. He had never noticed how much Vera watched, how much she retained, how much she had quietly decided. "Does he know you called me?" Nora said. "No," Vera said. "He thinks I am having lunch with the museum board." Nora looked at her for a long moment. Then, for the first time since this began, she smiled. A real one. "Vera," she said, "I think we may have underestimated each other." Vera's expression shifted, just slightly. The corners of her eyes warmed. "I think that is probably true," she said. They had lunch. They talked about the baby, about names. Vera loved Hazel. She said it sounded like someone with a backbone. Nora agreed. They did not talk about Grant again. They did not need to. Eli called her the next morning. "I have been going through the Calloway Holdings structure," he said. "I found something." "Tell me," she said. She heard papers shuffling. "There is a holding company nested inside the main LLC structure that appears to have been set up about 8 months ago. The timing is interesting. 8 months ago. Right around when she got pregnant." What does it hold? She said. Real estate, Eli said. 3 properties, not the ones you know about. These are smaller: a condo in Tiburon, a lot in Sonoma, a commercial space in Soma. Total value approximately $4.1 million. She was quiet. Eli, she said. Is that a domestic asset that was supposed to be disclosed in the marital estate? That, he said carefully, is what Patricia needs to look into. She put down her coffee cup he had been preparing while she was pregnant. While she was picking out nursery furniture and folding blush-colored towels, he had been setting up a structure to reduce what she would be entitled to. She had known he was capable of calculated decisions. She had not known he had been calculating against her for that long. The anger was different this time. Quieter, colder. She called Patricia. Patricia said in her deposition voice, "Forward everything." That afternoon, she went for a long walk. She needed to be outside. She needed the bay air and the physical reality of the ground under her feet. She walked from the house down to the Embarcadero slowly, with the particular wide-legged gait of a woman in her final weeks of pregnancy. She looked at the water, the ferries, the tourist boats, the light on the bay doing its constant changing trick. She thought about who she was becoming. Not who she was before Grant. She could not go back to that. Not who she was during Grant. She did not want that. Something new. Something that existed on the other side of this particular fire. A woman who understood the value of the things she created. A woman who had stopped being invisible. The hardest part, she thought, is admitting I knew all along. She had known at some level that she had been diminishing herself. She had felt it in the small compressions, the adjustments, the turned-down volume. She had told herself it was partnership. She had told herself it was love. Love means compromise and accommodation and bending. But there is a difference between bending and disappearing. She was done disappearing. She stood at the railing above the water and looked at the bay for a long time. Then she turned around and walked home. She had work to do. The deposition was scheduled for a Tuesday. Nora was 39 weeks and 3 days pregnant when she walked into the conference room at Patricia's firm and sat down across the table from Grant Calloway and his attorney, a man named Bradford Wells, who wore expensive suits and a practiced expression of boredom. Nora was wearing navy. She had chosen it deliberately. She looked rested. She had slept 8 hours. She had eaten breakfast. She had called Dot before she left the house, and Dot had said, "Remember, you wrote the rules on this one." She was ready. Grant looked terrible. She noticed it before she let herself not notice it: the gray under his eyes, the tension in his jaw, the way he did not quite look at her when she came in. He was wearing the navy suit she had bought him for the investor conference 2 years ago. She wondered if that was accidental. Bradford Wells started with the preliminary questions. Patricia's associate handled them. Then came the documentation review. Bradford Wells had clearly not anticipated Vera's involvement. When Patricia introduced documentation from the Calloway Family Foundation related to the nested LLC structure, Bradford Wells asked for a recess. Twice. He and Grant spent 11 minutes in the hallway between requests which Nora used to drink tea from the thermostat had packed her and review her own notes. She could hear Grant's voice from the hallway. Not the words, just the register. The rising, controlled panic register of a man who is discovering that the walls are closer than he thought. She finally understood what had been hidden. Not just the affair, not just Sloan. The whole architecture of it, the assumption that Nora would be manageable, would be grateful for what she was given, would not understand the full scope of what she was owed. The assumption that the woman who had reorganized herself around his ambitions would continue to be shaped by whatever space he left for her. He had made the same mistake most powerful men make about the women they underestimate. He had confused compliance with limitation. Bradford Wells came back in. He sat down. He said, "My client would like to discuss a settlement outside of court." Patricia looked at Nora. Nora said nothing for a moment. Then she said, "On what terms?" Bradford Wells outlined an offer. It was generous by the standards of what Grant had probably expected to offer 2 months ago. It was less generous than what the prenup and the hidden assets entitled her to. Nora knew the numbers. She had spent 6 weeks learning the numbers. "That is not the right number," she said quietly, not aggressively, just factually. Bradford Wells blinked. "Mrs. Calloway," he said. "The prenup is clear," she said. "The infidelity is documented. The hidden LLC contains approximately $4.1 million in assets that were not disclosed in the marital estate. Patricia has the forensic documentation." She folded her hands on the table. "I would like the correct number, please." Grant was looking at her now, really looking at her, like he was seeing something he had missed. Bradford Wells asked for another recess. This time it was 23 minutes. When they came back, Bradford Wells had a new number. Nora looked at it. She looked at Patricia. Patricia gave the smallest nod. "I will take that under advisement," Nora said. They settled 3 days later. The house was hers, full primary custody of Hazel with reasonable paternal visitation. 38% of marital assets. A support arrangement that was, as Patricia put it, fair and then some. Acknowledgement in the settlement documentation of the undisclosed LLC assets, which Grant's team tried to minimize and failed. She signed the papers at Patricia's office on a Thursday afternoon. The pen was heavy in her hand. She signed. She felt something move through her. Not triumph exactly. Not quite. Something quieter. More like the moment after a long illness when you take a full deep breath and realize the fever broke. Patricia shook her hand. Eli, who had come for the signing, shook her hand too. He held it a half-second longer than professional courtesy required. She noticed. She filed it away for a later day. She drove home. She went into the house, her house. This was her house now. That strange new fact. And she sat in the kitchen and she called Dot. "It is done," she said. Dot started to cry immediately, which made Nora cry. They cried on the phone together for a while. Then Dot said, "I am coming this weekend. I want to be there when that baby comes." "She is probably coming before the weekend," Nora said. "Then I am coming tomorrow," Dot said. Nora laughed. It was a real laugh. She had not realized how long it had been. That night she called Claudette. She told her about the settlement, about the deposition, about Vera and the foundation documents and Ely and the LLC. Claudette listened. When Nora finished, Claudette said, "How do you feel?" Nora thought about it. "Lighter," she said, "and also like something is over. Not just the marriage. Like a version of myself is over." "Which version?" Claudette said. She thought about it. The woman at the kitchen table waiting for her husband. The woman who had turned down the volume. The woman who had been so busy being a perfect wife that she had forgotten to be a full person. "The version that thought love meant making myself convenient," she said. Claudette was quiet. "I think that is the most important thing you have said in 6 months of sessions," she said. Her water broke at 2:47 in the morning on a Saturday. Dot was asleep in the guest room. Nora knocked on the door and said, in a completely calm voice, "Mom, it is time." And Dot was out of bed and dressed and had the go bag by the door within 4 minutes, which was the most impressive thing Nora had ever witnessed. The drive to California Pacific Medical Center took 11 minutes. Nora sat in the passenger seat with her hand on the dashboard and counted through contractions and thought, randomly, about all the things she had feared about this moment, about doing it alone, about not having a husband holding her hand. She looked over at Dot. Dot was driving with complete focus, hands at 10 and 2, jaw set. "I am not doing this alone. I have never been alone. Labor was 11 hours. It was exactly as terrible and exactly as extraordinary as everyone says, and neither description is sufficient." Dot held her hand through the whole thing. She did not talk too much. She did not give advice. She just held on. At 1:51 in the afternoon, Hazel Grace Calloway was born. 7 pounds 2 ounces, a full head of dark hair. Eyes that were still the undecided blue of new babies, but had a particular bright quality that Nora recognized immediately, not from Grant, not from herself, but from photographs of Dot as a young woman. "She looks like us," Nora thought. "She looks like the women who made her." The nurse placed her on Nora's chest. Hazel looked up at her mother. She had been in the world for 40 seconds. She was ancient and brand new at the same moment. Nora looked at her daughter. "Hi," she said. "I am your mom. I am going to tell you things. Some of them will be wrong. Most of them, I mean." Hazel closed her eyes. Nora pressed her lips to her daughter's forehead. She breathed in the impossible particular smell of her. She felt fully and completely the thing she had been trying to locate for 3 months. Not joy exactly, though joy was part of it. Something more fundamental, the bedrock sense of "I am exactly where I am supposed to be." Dot was crying silently in the chair by the window. When Nora looked over, Dot waved her hand at herself dismissively like, "Do not mind me. Ignore this." Nora laughed. Hazel opened her eyes at the sound. Grant came to the hospital the next morning. He called first. He asked if he could come. Nora said yes. She had talked to Patricia about it, and Patricia said, "He is the father. He has a right to meet her. And it is better for every future conversation if the first meeting is not a crisis." He came alone. He stood in the doorway of the hospital room for a moment. He looked at Nora and then at the baby in the bassinet beside the bed. Something moved across his face, something she could not name and did not try to. "Can I?" he said. "Yes," she said. He walked to the bassinet. He looked down at Hazel for a long time. He had never looked so young. He started. "I know," Nora said. He picked up his daughter with more care than she had expected. He held her against his chest. He looked at the top of her head. His eyes went wet at the edges. Nora watched him. She felt complicated things. She did not try to simplify them. He looked up at her over the baby's head. "I am sorry, Nora," he said. "Not the defensive sorry. Not the sorry you are upset sorry. The actual kind." It was the first time he had said it that way. She thought about whether to accept it. She decided that refusing it would not make her life better. "I know," she said. "Take care of her when she is with you, Grant. That is what matters now." He nodded. He held Hazel for 20 more minutes. He handed her back carefully. "The way you handle something you know is not yours to keep." He kissed the baby's forehead. He looked at Nora once more. "You are going to be good at this," he said. "You were always good at the things that mattered." She let that sit in the room. She did not answer. He left. Dot came back in with coffee from the good place 2 blocks away. "How was it?" she said. "Fine," Nora said. "It was fine." Dot handed her the coffee. She sat down. They were quiet for a while, listening to Hazel breathe. There is something that happens when you hold a new life in your arms. Everything that was enormous becomes its actual size. The betrayal does not disappear. The grief does not disappear, but it finds its proper place. And what is left, underneath all of it, is this: you are still here. You built something that matters, and it is breathing against your chest right now. She heard about Grant and Sloan 3 weeks later. She heard about it the way you hear most things when you are no longer in the center of a situation obliquely, through someone at the edge, Vera called. "I thought you should know," Vera said, "before someone else tells you." "Know what?" Nora said. "Grant and Sloan have separated," Vera said. A pause. Apparently Sloan discovered, approximately 2 weeks into their arrangement becoming public, that Grant had been in contact with his assistant. A different one. Nora sat very still. Then she said, "Oh, yes," Vera said. She thought about Sloan. She tried to locate the satisfaction she had expected to feel. She searched for it carefully. It was barely there. A small flicker, less than she had thought. What she felt instead was something closer to tired, and then almost reluctantly something closer to pity. Not for Grant. For Sloan, who had thrown away a 20-year friendship for a man who was, at his core, a man who moved from project to project. She chose the novelty. Now she has the experience. "Thank you for telling me, Vera," she said. "Of course," Vera said. A pause. "How is Hazel?" "She rolled over yesterday," Nora said. "She looked very surprised about it." Vera made a sound that was almost a laugh. "I will come by Sunday, if that is still all right." "Sunday is great," Nora said. She hung up. She was sitting at the kitchen table where this had all begun. The same kitchen. Different everything. The house felt different without Grant in it, bigger in some ways, quieter in others. She had rearranged some things. Put up some things that had been in storage. Taken down one or two that did not feel like hers. She had gotten a plant. 3 plants, actually. She had always wanted plants, and Grant had said the light in the house was not right for them. She had been growing them for 6 weeks and they were doing fine. She heard Hazel stir in the baby monitor. She stood up. She went upstairs. She picked up her daughter from the bassinet and held her in the amber light of the nursery and rocked her and thought about all the things she wanted her to know. That she was loved before she was born. That her mother had built something that would hold her. That love was not diminishment. That marriage, done right, is not the giving up of yourself, but the bringing of yourself, all of it, into something shared, that you can survive being wrong about someone, that surviving it makes you different, but not lesser, that sometimes the life you rebuild on the other side of loss is bigger than the one that broke. Sloan called her 6 weeks after Hazel was born, late on a Wednesday night. Nora was feeding the baby and her phone lit up on the arm of the glider. She looked at it for a long time. She answered. "Nora," Sloan said. Her voice was different from what Nora remembered, smaller. The certainty gone out of it. "Sloan," Nora said. A long silence. "I do not know why I called," Sloan said. "I think you do," Nora said. Another silence. "I am sorry," Sloan said. It came out like something she had been holding underwater and finally let up. "I do not. There is nothing I can say that makes it." "No," Nora agreed. "There is not." Hazel had fallen asleep against her chest. "Can I ask you something?" Nora said. Sloan said nothing, which was a yes. "Did you love him?" Nora said. "Or did you want what he had?" A very long silence. "I wanted to be you," Sloan said. The honesty of it was almost shocking. "I always wanted to be you. And then I thought if I had what you had, that is not love, Sloan," Nora said quietly. "That is not even friendship." "I know that now," Sloan said. Nora sat with the weight of Hazel on her chest. 6 weeks of sleeping in shifts and learning to eat with one hand and crying in the shower and also laughing more than she expected, Hazel had a habit of making an expression of extreme offended dignity when the pacifier fell out, and it was impossible not to laugh every time. "I am not going to forgive you right now," Nora said. "I do not know if I will. That is not a threat. It is just honest." "I know," Sloan said. "I am not calling to ask you to." "Then why are you calling?" Nora said. Another pause. "Because I needed you to know I am sorry," Sloan said. And because she stopped. "Because you were my best friend for a long time, and I miss you, and I have no right to say that, and I am saying it anyway." Nora was quiet. "Good night, Sloan," she said. She hung up. She sat in the glider for a long time afterward. She did not cry. She did not feel triumphant. She felt complete. Like that conversation had closed something that needed to be closed. She looked down at Hazel. "Your Aunt Sloan," she said softly, "is going to have to do a lot of work on herself before she is ready to meet you." Hazel breathed evenly against her chest. "But maybe someday," Nora said. "People can surprise you. That goes both ways. The truth about betrayal is this. The people who hurt you are not the whole story. You are the whole story. What you did with the worst thing that happened to you. How you got up off the kitchen floor. How you read Goodnight Moon alone in a nursery at 2 in the morning and decided to build something better. That is the whole story. 3 months later, Nora started the consulting practice. She had a name for it. She had a logo, designed by a woman in Hayes Valley whose own business had started the same way on the other side of something that ended. She had 2 clients before she launched, people who had heard through Eli and through Patricia and through the quiet network of people who had been watching her case with the particular attention of those who respect competence. Her first client called her ruthlessly prepared. She liked that. She kept the house through the spring. She repapered the dining room in a deep green she had always wanted, and Grant had called impractical. She planted tomatoes in the garden. She hired a part-time nanny, a woman named Gloria, 61 years old, 4 grandchildren, who sang to Hazel in Spanish and English, and who Hazel regarded with an expression of pure adoration. Vera came on Sundays. That had evolved from obligation to Nora did not want to call it friendship exactly, but something real. Something honest. Vera had a way of looking at Hazel that stripped everything else away from her. She became a different person around the baby, softer, less architecture. You are good with her, Nora said one Sunday, watching Vera pace the living room with Hazel on her shoulder. I was terrible with Grant, Vera said. I was too concerned with what he was becoming to pay attention to what he was. She looked at Nora over the baby's head. I will not make that mistake again. She is a girl, Nora said. That might be different. Different in ways that matter, Vera said simply. Eli had coffee with her on a Thursday in March. He had texted first, "Are you free for coffee sometime?" No professional reason, just coffee. She had looked at that text for a while. She had texted back, "Thursday morning, Hayes Street Coffee Place, 9 o'clock?" He was already there when she arrived. He stood up when he saw her. He was wearing a coat she had not seen before, and he looked slightly nervous, which she found more endearing than she expected. They talked for 2 hours, not about the case, about other things. About the book he was reading, A History of Pacific Shipping Lanes, that sounded more interesting when he described it than it had any right to be. About Hazel. About what she was building. About a trip he had taken to the Italian Veneto the previous autumn that had involved getting lost and finding a restaurant with no English menu and having the best meal of his life. She laughed 3 times, real laughs, the kind that surprised her. When they stood outside the coffee shop in the March morning light, he said, "I would like to do this again." She said, "I think I would too." They did not make it a plan yet. They left it open. That felt right. She was not in a hurry for anything. She was learning to live in the space that had opened up, to not fill it immediately, to let it be hers for a while. Grant called her on a Tuesday. Hazel was 4 months old. She was beginning to try to laugh, working hard at it, making a sound that was halfway between a coo and a hiccup, regarding her own noise with what Nora could only describe as philosophical interest. Grant called the landline, which she still had because Patricia had advised keeping it. "Hey," he said. "Hey," she said. "I wanted to. I have been thinking about something," he said. He paused. She heard him take a breath. "I know there is nothing I can say that undoes any of it. I know that. But I need you to know." Another pause. "I do not know how you did it, how you handled all of it the way you did. With the house, and the lawyers, and the pregnancy, and—" He stopped. "I came into that marriage thinking I was the one who knew how things worked, how the world worked. I thought I was the one with the leverage." Nora was very still. "Yeah," she said softly. "I was wrong about a lot of things," he said. "I was wrong about you specifically." "Yes," she said. "You were." He was quiet for a moment. "She is amazing," he said. "Hazel. She made a face at me on video yesterday that I cannot stop thinking about." "She is going to give you trouble," Nora said. "She has opinions already." "I know," he said, and his voice shifted, something warm and rueful moving through it. "She got that from you." Nora did not answer for a moment. "Grant," she said, "be her father. Be present and consistent, and show up when you say you will. That is what she needs from you." "I will," he said. "Okay," she said. "Good night." She hung up. She stood in the kitchen for a long time. Looking back, she could finally see, not just what he had done, not just what she had lost, the whole picture. The marriage she had been in, the good parts real, the cracks real too. A man who was more than his worst behavior and less than his best presentation. A woman who had made herself smaller in ways she had not fully recognized until she had room to grow back. She had been her own warden. She had held the key the whole time. The prison door had been unlocked all along. She went upstairs. She lifted Hazel from the crib. The baby blinked, disgruntled, then focused on Nora's face with that particular intense attention that babies have, like they are memorizing everything. Nora carried her to the window. Outside, San Francisco was doing what it does. The light was happening. The fog was moving. The bay was there, always there, blue and silver and impossible. "I want to tell you something," Nora said to her daughter. Hazel looked at her, present, focused. "I almost gave all of this up," Nora said. "Not the house, not the money, me. I almost gave myself up. I was doing it slowly, thinking it was love. The fog shifted in the middle distance. It was not love. Love does not ask you to disappear. Real love, the kind I hope you find someday, the kind I am going to teach you to recognize real love says, bring all of yourself. All of it. The parts that take up space, and the parts that have opinions, and the parts that know what they are entitled to and ask for it plainly. Hazel blinked. I know you are 4 months old, Nora said. I know you cannot understand any of this. I am going to tell you anyway, because I figure the words go somewhere, into the room, into the air, into you over time. She pressed her cheek to the top of Hazel's head. You came from all of this, she said quietly. From the fire and the mess and the survival. You are not the disaster, you are what came after. She got an email from Patricia that afternoon. Nora, all final paperwork filed and cleared. As of today, you are legally and completely a free woman. You already knew this, but I like saying it out loud. Go do something wonderful. She read it twice. She saved it. She went downstairs and put Hazel in the bouncy seat on the kitchen counter. Hazel regarded the kitchen with the tolerant curiosity of a person who has accepted that kitchens are simply part of the world one moves through. Nora made coffee. She opened the window. The air came in. She thought about who she had been the last time she stood at this counter, waiting for the oatmeal to cool, not reading her husband's phone because she trusted him, full and certain and completely blind to the thing that was already unraveling. She thought about who she was now, not fixed exactly. Healing was not the same as fixed. She would have good days and days that ambushed her. She would see something, a restaurant they had gone to, a song from the trip to Positano, the particular slant of afternoon light through these windows, and it would catch in her chest for a moment. That was going to happen. She had accepted that. But underneath the catching, underneath the grief that would surface and recede and surface again in smaller and smaller waves, underneath all of that was something that had not been there before. Herself, not the wife, not the partner, not the one who turned down the volume and reorganized the towels and waited in a beautiful kitchen for a man who was somewhere else. Her, Nora. The woman who had written a trapdoor into her own prenuptial agreement and forgotten it was there until she needed it. The woman who had sat on the kitchen floor and then stood back up. The woman who had gone through the worst months of her life while 8 months pregnant and had come out on the other side with a daughter and a house and her own name on her own work. Starting over had felt impossible, but staying would have been worse. She had always known that. She had just needed long enough to trust it. She looked over at Hazel. Hazel was examining her own fist with great scientific seriousness. Your grandmother is coming next weekend, Nora told her. Your other grandmother is coming Sunday. On Thursday, I have a meeting with a new client who wants to restructure their real estate portfolio, and I am going to be very good at helping him. She picked up her coffee. We have a full life, Hazel. The baby looked up. She made the almost law sound, the hiccup coo. She regarded her own noise with that philosophical expression. Nora laughed. Outside, the fog was burning off the bay. The light was going gold. The morning was beginning, ordinary and extraordinary, the way all mornings begin, one more chance to be exactly who you decided to become. She was ready.